Hello and welcome to Pulse, your podcast delving into all things health, innovation, digital and data. Proudly brought to you by Pulse IT News. I'm your host, Louise Shaper.
And I'm your co-host, George Margellis.
George, how was your weekend?
Look, the weekend was great. We actually got to go to a wedding. And the last couple of weeks since our last recording have been eventful, but interesting as always. How about you, Louise?
How big was this Greek wedding?
Well, the typical small Greek wedding, 350 people crammed into a room, eating, drinking and dancing all night. Nothing out of the normal for a big Greek wedding.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah, because it's been a while since we've caught up. We had such amazing feedback, and thank you everybody who took the time to comment online or to contact us privately about Amandeep's episode. I was really hoping her story would get significant traction, and it appears it has. And so thanks everyone for your appreciation of her telling her story and the power within it.
It was a great story. One of the things I did do during the last couple of weeks, we had the Aging Australia New South Wales conference, and the conference was closed by a humanoid robot called Daisy, which was a very, very interesting experience. So I actually met Daisy earlier this year in Singapore at the World Aging Festival, and one of the nursing homes here in Australia, Australian Nursing Home Foundation over in Gordon, have her over here on a guest tour to test her out. So now, to their credit, they're doing some really interesting research around it. It was interesting watching the progression. So when I first met the original Dexy, which was the Daisy's predecessor, it was very bland and robotic. But this one is actually quite human-like and has quite a few endearing features.
Well, that's great that it's here trialing it. And I guess it responds to voice commands?
Yeah, and it sort of is linked in with AI. So it's that sort of merging of AI and robotics. So it was answering questions from audience members in 5 different languages. And in one case, actually being asked a question in one language and responding in another. It's used for sort of, building engagement and exercise routines. But the AI component of it was really quite interesting in that, for example, they asked the robot, what do you know about the Australian aged care governance rules? And she came off with a classical ChatGPT type answer, which answered a lot of the questions. And I think that intersection of AI and robotics may well be something we'll jump forward in the near future and take it all by surprise.
Yes. Well, Elon is certainly hoping that will be the case. He's banking a lot on that in his own company.
This wasn't one of Elon's, which is a good thing.
Yeah, that's right.
What about yourself? Anything exciting come up in the last couple of weeks?
Well, I actually had a really cool opportunity to go to the Walter and Eliza Hall Institute of Medical Research. So we refer to that now as WEHI. I was talking to one of the scientist who was giving us a demo of her work. And I asked her, what made you want to come and work here and what really drives you? And she was saying that she actually used to work for one of the device manufacturers. And when this role came up, she said she was just so grateful they gave it to her. And she said it's the most advanced disease discovery lab in the Southern Hemisphere, which I didn't realize. And we got to see all sorts of things when we were there. So they had 4 spin-outs last year, all in promising areas of therapeutics. And they have these microscopes that are so sensitive that light, which usually would kill the cells, it doesn't, because the microscopes have that level of sensitivity. So the light doesn't kill the cells, which means you can actually see how the pathogens enter the cells, like at this really minutiae level. So it's enabling them to understand all sorts of things about how disease originates as well, especially from pathogens. And then what else do we see? We saw drug discovery robots, so not humanoid by any strength at all, but these drug discovery robots. So, like we've all seen it, even if you've never worked in a lab, you would have seen it on television shows where you've got this little, I think they're called pipettes, and, you're putting little microfluids almost in these little tiny test tubes. And we had people there who actually used to work in those labs. They don't anymore. And saying that when they were doing their PhDs and stuff, you'd all have to do that by hand. It just take hours and hours. And now the robot does it automatically for you. Like you can do thousands of drugs against these targets. So that was really cool getting to see that. And they do great work at WEHI. And George, I wanted to tell you too, a little spoiler alert for a future episode, that one of the researchers is going to come on the show. She is doing work that I was just blown away by. I mean, everything was amazing. But looking at super survivors of cancer and looking at, do these super survivors hold the key to cancer control and management and understanding? So from memory, The definition of a super survivor in her research was you have had multiple different cancers. So maybe one, you unfortunately got liver cancer, and then another time you got a brain tumor, but they treat it in every way that disease would normally be treated, whether that's chemo, radio, operation, whatever, but you survive it. And then you keep living and you're having a good life, but then you get another cancer. And so, these poor people, but apparently there's a lot of survivor guilt because they live until ripe old ages, but the cancer never gets them. And so they're known as super survivors. And yeah, she's going to come and talk to us later on in the year when she can talk a bit more about it publicly, because it's a bit super secret at the moment, but really cool stuff right here in Melbourne.
Look, I think if one thing we can do with our podcast is promote Australian research and let the world know about what's happening here, because there is some great stuff here. I look at Garvin up here in Sydney. Again, I go to their functions quite regularly. Some amazing research, which really is under the radar. I mean, unlike many other countries, we don't sit there beating our chest saying how great we are. But if you look at the number of Nobel Prize awards Australia has gotten per capita, we're up there with the best in the world.
Punch above our weight.
Yeah, our academic system's great, and a number of the researchers we've spoken to over the year or so of our podcast, I mean, there's great stuff happening here. We need to promote them more. We've got the Medical Futures Fund. We've got other funds in place, but I think we just re-examine that. And we're seeing what's happening in America. There's probably a lot of research over there which is looking for a new home. Good weather, good people. Australia's the place to come.
That's right. Come do your science here and you get to hang out in cool places like Melbourne and, walk the beaches of Sydney and other places. Yeah, no, so actually I saw the Australian Financial Review. I was reading it this morning while I was lying in bed thinking I really need to get out of bed. But I was reading an article in the AFR about, yes, the brain drain that Australia is trying to grab hold of people wanting to leave the US. And there was an agency quoted who does that sort of executive and science type engineers placement services. And they said they've had an increase in interest from Americans 350% over what they would normally get.
Yeah, well, a number of my colleagues I've known have tapped me on the shoulder and asked me what are the visa requirements for Australia. So it's opportunity there. The other thing, I was watching on the weekend show on Business Weekend, and they were interviewing the CEO of one of the largest superannuation companies. Now, superannuation in Australia is a $3+ trillion investment. How we leverage some of that investment for better use, and healthcare is a huge potential profitable sector for superannuation. So there's opportunities for us to rethink the way the landscape's working, and the fact that things are changing elsewhere in the world is an opportunity for us to take advantage of.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, George, we gave a lot of hot topics today. Shall we get to the hot topics now?
Let's jump into them.
Now, first up, George, we're heading over to the UK, where there has been huge news that could actually have a global impact. NHS England has issued guidance that ambient voice technology, what we usually call AI scribes, that automatically transcribe and summarise clinical conversations, well, they are now deemed a Class 1 medical device. So this technology, which has taken off rapidly across healthcare globally, which was not regulated, it now is regulated in the UK pretty much overnight. And it was only in April this year that the NHS actually published guidance encouraging clinicians to use ambient voice technology. And here we are. The immediate ramifications of this are that any pilots and even minimal viable products that are in use, including if they're free, you must cease using them immediately until they've got the tick of approval. The British Medical Association have advised their GP members to pause the use of these AI scribing tools until they've checked that the products are registered with the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, MHRA, and that they're compliant with the NHS standards. Now, we've said before on the pod that 2025 was going to be the year of the AI scribe. Personally, I still think that is the case. Clinicians love AI scribes. They offer huge benefits for clinicians and patients in terms of capturing the full conversation and information that's exchanged and can be summarised, coded, and also referred to in the future by patients and clinicians. But this development is definitely a setback, especially what happens if other countries follow suit. Talking about throwing grenades, what do you think about this one, George?
Well, as you said, Louise, I think that 2025 definitely has been up till now, and I think still has potential to be the year of the AI scribe. But it's been a really hot topic over the last year, and you and I have seen a number of both local and international solutions out there. Their uptake has been amazing. But anyone who's aware of the good old Gartner hype cycle would be no surprise that having gone through that peak of inflated expectations, we're now descending into that trough of disillusionment. However, the difference here is the trigger isn't that the products aren't being accepted. It's that the regulatory controls that come in. And I guess this was always a risk when you start getting into healthcare, is that regulations are dynamic and meeting regulatory requirements are a challenge. The reality is AI scribes were meant to be a tool to support clinicians, but it seems, fortunately, and this is where I think the red flag was raised by the regulatory authorities, that some of our clinical colleagues have gotten a bit lazy and handed over some of the responsibility for quality and care over to their computers rather than themselves. And that's the big job. Now, the scribe's job was to capture the conversation and summarize it in a nice, neat format. And clinicians supposed to check it and validate it. I think, unfortunately, many of our clinician colleagues, and not bagging them for doing this, I mean, the reality is it's generally pretty accurate. So, for most cases, you probably find that it works. So checking these things over and over can be a fairly boring task. So, I guess we need to rethink that workflow.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think it was really a good lesson there for startups as well, or anyone creating companies and new technology products. So AI scribes, at least in the UK, previously outside of regulations. So you're like, great, cool. I can just go and knock on doors and do my best to sell my product. Now, there's over 80 AI scribe companies in the world, and all of them, they're all new. They've only been around for a couple of years. And even if there's quite a few companies here that are AI scribe companies, but only, I think, 7 of them I read in the UK went and got regulated and, got certified and got the tick of approval, even though they didn't need to. So I think there's a really good lesson there, because now everyone else, all their competitors, have had to completely pull out. Effectively, they've gone to 0 clients, even if they were market leaders. And now they've got to go through the regulatory process, which will slow them down. And then it's a great opportunity for the companies who are already regulated to go, well, hey, I've got a product for you, because clinicians have already gotten so used to them.
Yep. Look, and I guess this is one of the key learnings of, if you're going to play in healthcare, you need to understand the ecosystem, and regulatory compliance is critical, as is quality and safety measurements. And this is where we can take some lessons from the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, they seem to be large and bloated and have a whole bunch of separate departments, but the reality is they need that to be able to work in this environment. And digital health, I think, is no different. We just need to understand those challenges. But also, we as clinicians need to take responsibility for our actions. I mean, if we're using a tool to augment our productivity, and, I've complained about this in the past as well. This unending desire to significantly, continuously improve our productivity. We've seen the result in burnout in clinicians, and clinicians doing shortcuts to make things easier. We have to think about the fact that sometimes productivity may plateau. We may not have that exponential increase forever. And the documentation is such a critical part of what we do as a clinician. And essentially, if you speak to the medical defense organizations, they keep on telling clinicians that your documentation is your greatest defense against litigation going forward. So if you don't actually know what's in that documentation, you're really opening a Pandora's box of new risks there.
Yeah. And productivity, look, it's a little outside the scope of this show because it's not health specific. But, OpenAI, for those who haven't seen it, they've been in Australia trying to get our government to give tax breaks to companies, to businesses that use AI. It's like the stupidest thing I've ever heard. And I was like, please tell me no one in our finance department of Treasury is going to take that seriously. That would be the stupidest thing to do, is to offer tax breaks, even if it did work.
But if the software in the back of the finance department sits there recommending through their scribes. The other thing, of course, we've had this discussion with people like Liz Salmi, is that generating documentation is one thing, validating it. Yes, it's great to have the clinician validate it. But what about the role of the patient? I mean, these tools have the capability for us to share notes with the patients. Maybe they should be the ones who are helping us validate it. So again, we just need to rethink the whole documentation journey. I remember our good friend Mike Bainbridge highlights this a number of times. We really don't have any standards around how we document clinical interactions. We do it on the fly.
That's right. And that was the other thing with standards is in the UK for this new regulatory mechanism, they've actually said that part of that is that your scribe has to be able to integrate with electronic health records or EMRs or EPRs, whatever, your preferred term. They tend to use electronic patient records over there. Like that's a big win for interoperability. But then again, it also massive market dynamics, like, 80 scribe companies, even if they were all brilliant and cost similar amounts, in the end, I'm not even sure whether there will be an AI scribe market in the same way as it is now, because this will just become a commodity that everyone expects. And the software that you use to run your hospitals and manually put in clinical notes, there'll be automated tools embedded to do that. If I was an AI scribe company, I think I'd be trying to sell to some big vendors and rather than sell to individual clinicians.
Market dynamics, look back at the world of microprocessors, how that's changed over the years. Yeah, we can be a dominant player one day and be a staggering disaster soon after. Again, I think we need to take all those sort of things into account and think about this more efficiently.
Yes, well, let's see if other countries do the same thing. And if you're listening and you have a product that might get regulated at a moment's notice, hopefully you are making some phone calls, talking to your team and seeing what you can do about going through that process ahead of time. Now, we're going to stay with the UK, George, because there has been a heap of big news stories coming out of government. First, funding for digital health. Well, to paraphrase Tom Cruise in Jerry Maguire, the UK government is showing the money to digital transformation across the NHS. They've announced an investment of £10 billion. That's almost 21 billion Australian dollars or 13.5 billion US dollars. All that money is just for technology and digital transformation. And then another story that came out was about an AI safety system. So the government have announced that they are building an AI early warning system. The idea is that an AI system will scan all your patient data in the NHS. It'll flag safety issues in real time. The idea, of course, is to enhance patient safety by identifying safety concerns and maybe stopping failures before they escalate. This one was giving me flashbacks to another Tom Cruise movie, Minority Report, where future crimes could be stopped before they occur. George, no one is saying we've got precogs working in the NHS, but is this an opportunity to see how AI could actually reduce harm?
Look, there's so much in these stories. I mean, I'm reminded of a quote by a guy called Yogi Berra, who was an American baseballer who was famous for making some dumb-sounding but very enlightening quotes. And his quote here is, "It's like deja vu all over again." My very first international experience with eHealth was at a HIMSS conference overseas where I heard the head of the NHS National Program for IT, or NPFID as it was known, and this was back in the 2002, talking about how they were going to use technology to innovate and modernize the NHS and make it a digital platform. So that was 23 years ago.
And the whole world was watching. It was the biggest thing. No one had ever tried to do anything like it. It was so exciting.
It was huge. £12 billion back in those days, which is probably equates to double that now, was spent. It had lots of visibility. England was broken up into 5 areas. They had competing EMR vendors. And this was very back in the days when EMRs were the primary tool. But at the end of it all, some people said it was a disaster. But the reality is that the NHS spine came out of that. A whole bunch of things came out of it. And the reality is that whilst it didn't deliver on its full promise, it did a great job in driving a digital mindset in healthcare that didn't exist beforehand. So, the concept of digital maturity, which we use a lot nowadays, and the skills that we developed during that time were a benefit. And let's be honest, we poached some of their best people and brought them over here. So, it worked well for us. But the reality is that it was a huge overarching project. And for you and I, who used to read all the health IT media, it was flashed all over that media. So it was a big thing. Full circle again, we've come back around now. The UK is announcing similar things. And again, change of government, change of plans. I think it's an opportunity. And we need to take into account that 2002 and 2025, that's 23 years of Moore's Law in progress. So the technology we have at our fingertips now is much more significant. So I'm hoping it does work. I'll be watching it with great interest. The AI safety tool, I think, is a really interesting concept. The fact that we're thinking about this not just as a compliance, but as a quality improvement exercise, but goes back a bit to our earlier discussion. Just putting AI around something doesn't necessarily make better. This is where we really need to do that research. We need to have the evidence that we're actually doing something that's effective and efficient. How we research AI in healthcare is still nascent, and we need to understand what measures we need to take into account. We've got some examples here in Australia of some great researchers in space. What we don't want to do is spend the money on the technology and scrimp on the evaluation and the research, which is a common fault we've had in a lot of systems. I think we combine those two and link them in some sort of way that we can measure as we go. We have an opportunity here to revolutionize the way we deliver care.
Yeah, and the stats are terrible. This has been an ongoing fact and it hasn't really improved for decades since the Institute of Medicine's report back in, when was that came out?
1999.
1999, there you go. And, it really pointed out just how dangerous healthcare is. And still the stats are 1 in 10 patients are actually harmed while receiving care, and up to 80% of that harm is preventable. This trial of this AI safety mechanism, it's going to be first rolled out in maternity services in certain areas of the NHS. So the idea is that it'll look for stillbirths, neonatal deaths, brain injuries, and regulators will be notified if numbers are higher than expected. And I thought, wow, if you're pregnant right now or you're planning a family, the idea is, what do you mean higher than expected? I would have thought that isn't the number 0 that we should be aiming for? But, that maternal safety is a massive problem in America. It's quite dangerous being pregnant in the States, and worse, of course, if you're in lower socioeconomic areas of the United States. But here in Australia as well, we've seen news reports after news reports of problems happening around births that are preventable. And we've had the IVF clinics making mistakes. That's, our CEO there has had to resign over it. Patient safety is such a concern. And if AI can be, as you said, not just implemented well, but designed, evaluated, improved on, then this is certainly an area that needs some improvement.
Absolutely. Okay. And we know human error is definitely one of those factors that we need to take into account here. But it's interesting when we look at sort of these safety measures, and to err is human is a classic report. But when you dig deep into it, there's some of those statistics may not necessarily reflect the reality of what happens on the ground. But the problem is, if we automate systems designed by people who are subject to human error, automating a human error makes it much more efficient in producing a poor outcome. So we need to think about...
Yes, let's not do that.
There are pros and cons. And again, a lot of this just comes down to good education as well, making people aware of the risks and being able to measure those risks in a scalable way that's standardized and we know what we're talking about. The reality is there will always be some poor outcomes. Our goal is to minimize those to as low as possible. 0 would be great, but the reality is frailties are what they are. But if we at least have a strong research agenda around measuring, and this is where our friend Professor Braithwaite over at Macquarie University, with the work they're doing, where they measure the adherence to guidelines. We have best practices. Why don't we use those best practices? Those sort of things are things we need to think about.
Yes. Now, for our next hot topic, George, we're still in the UK, but it's a big deal. Those previous stories that we've discussed, they were pretty much just a preview of the big announcement, which just the other day, the NHS released their 10-year health plan for England. It's called Fit to the Future, and everything in this document, and I mean everything, is about health innovation and something we'd love to talk about at Pulse Pod, George, modifying business models and operating models of healthcare. The plan is for the NHS to make 3 massive shifts in how it works. The first one, from hospital to community. Second, from analogue to digital. And third, from sickness to prevention. Now, the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer, has backed his bold plan, saying the NHS needs to reform or die. This entire document, from the very first sentence, is about technology and innovation, but there's a dedicated section called From Analogue to Digital. And some highlights that I'm just pulling out and listing here, because it's a long document, include a single patient record, transforming the NHS app, and not just virtual care, but continuous monitoring for proactive management being the new normal. A health store for patients to access approved digital tools, a health data research service, which we've actually discussed previously on the show, genomics becoming pretty much routine, part of daily care, all hospitals to be AI-enabled within the next 10 years, and also wearables will become part of everyday healthcare too. And they're going to get rid of some of the stupid stuff like Jill Tomlinson said we should. They're going to get rid of the outdated tech. George, this all sounds like health utopia. Should we move to the UK?
Yes. The use of the word utopia in the context of the Australian TV show also puts us into, and for our overseas colleagues, check out ABC iView Utopia. I think you'll find it a fascinating program to watch about how systems work in Australia. But the reality is, this is again one of those examples. The change of government, it's throw out all the old strategy and start all over again. And the general concepts aren't new. We've been talking about the shift from hospital to community for decades now.
Oh, yes, your shift left from Intel days 20 years ago.
I've got a 25-year-old slide that shows shift left, and every now and then I see it pop up again. I sort of go, okay, let's discuss it. And look, even our own Strengthening Medicare report, which came out a couple of years ago, highlighted that need for shift from hospital to community. Now, England and the UK have the advantage in that the NHS manages the end-to-end healthcare service. So theoretically, they should have the levers there to do that more effectively. Switching to digital, I mean, that was the whole goal of NPFit 2023. And this idea that we move from sickness to prevention, Hippocrates wrote about that 2,500 years ago. These are new ideas. It's how do you implement them? And I think that we're producing yet another strategy document is a start, I guess. But the one thing that did interest me around this new plan, I do note that the British colleagues have a combined health and social care plan. Social care is what we call aged care. So they are thinking about it holistically, although they do have their own set of challenges there. But the reality is that we need to think about the whole system more effectively. We keep on talking about the need for system thinking. And these aren't just think tank. You need examples on the ground. So the fact that they're going to these integrated care boards, more localized solutions, gives us an opportunity to see some blooms blossoming. But it's a really hard job because the biggest challenge, of course, comes down to how much it costs, because all of these things cost money and all of our health departments are struggling to find the money they need to provide the services they can.
Yes, you're right. Although I did notice there's a little not so subtle rebranding as well. In parts of the document, instead of the National Health Service, they refer to it as the Neighbourhood Health Service. So again, just like emphasising community. But the critique seems to be that it's a vision statement. It's more of an ambition than an actual plan to get it done. And Health Services Journal, the journalist there actually said that he had seen an earlier draft, which actually had a delivery section in it. But that delivery section seems to have been removed. So I guess they're still working on how they're going to actually make that happen. But, the one thing I would say, because this is very exciting, it's like, yes, I want to get involved in helping people like you and me, George, who spent our whole career trying to actually make those things happen and builds teams of people to make that happen. The fact that this document isn't authored by a bureaucrat, though, it's not even the health minister's document, it's the Prime Minister's, the foreword's written by the Prime Minister. Of course, they've had a rocky first year. That's probably is a polite way to put it. They had a very short honeymoon period in the UK, but they want to get elected again. So if they are going full on and saying this is what we're going to do, and in a few years' time they can prove some gains, it could have a significant impact on their election chances either way, I guess.
Yeah. And the key thing was, I've been following this quite closely, and this strategy was announced by the Chancellor of the Exchequer, which is effectively their treasurer. So, they're looking at it from both a funding model as well. So kudos for the initiative, trying not to be sort of, motivating by saying that I've been there, done that. But the reality is they've gone through various iterations. Hopefully this is the one that kicks in. But you pointed out a really good point there. If it's a political initiative, then it's only as good as the term of the government running it. Whereas healthcare, and that has always been the beauty of the NHS, it's been there for 75, 80 years. It's a national initiative. It isn't tied to any political party or any political initiative. And I think that's what they really need to be able to focus on. The key challenge, and it's a demographic challenge. The UK still has one of the lowest per capita spends on healthcare, but they just need to spend some more because the demographics have changed. The cost of delivering care has changed. I think that's part of the biggest challenge. But, it's a great document. If they can deliver on even part of it, I think it will go a long way. It's a great opportunity for us to being fast followers, an opportunity for us to keep an eye out on a significant investment overseas. Sometimes being tied to Mother England has its advantages.
Yes, absolutely. All right, we will keep an eye in the show notes. I will put a link. So all of you who want to read the entire 168 pages or even just the executive summary, you can read that too. Now, talking of patient safety stories, it's been a while since we discussed cybersecurity on the pod, but today we've got two stories. Firstly, as reported in Pulse IT, the Western Australian Auditor General conducted a review in 2024 of WA's PathWest laboratory information system, and it found significant problems that risked patient confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the sensitive information the system holds. The findings were so bad that the Auditor General decided not to release the report publicly until PathWest had rectified the concerns. I guess because they didn't want to have any bad actors get any ideas about just how vulnerable their systems were. And then on a pretty much very similar scale, back in the UK now, it's also been revealed that a cybersecurity attack that occurred in 2024 on the pathology lab provider Synnovis contributed directly to the death of a patient. That patient wasn't able to get the results of a blood test in a timely manner, thus delaying diagnosis. Now, over 10,000 acute outpatient appointments were postponed in the UK as a result of this ransomware attack, and 1,700 elective procedures. George, in healthcare, poor cybersecurity hygiene isn't just inconvenient and financially costly, but of course it can actually cause direct patient harm, but it doesn't often get called out. And yet we've seen this example in the UK. Are you seeing health organisations lift their game when it comes to cybersecurity, unlike these two providers that needed to be prompted?
Cybersecurity is a real dilemma because, I did a bit of research. Worldwide, we spend over $200 billion just on cybersecurity across all industries. And, in healthcare, each dollar we spend on cybersecurity is one less dollar available for care delivery. So it's a really fine balance. And it's challenging, as you point out. Publishing that there's a cybersecurity deficit in an organization opens the door for a bad actor to try and take advantage of it. So we need to manage that more effectively. West and Synnovis highlight the importance of having good cybersecurity. It also includes being able to make sure that privacy is controlled. The problem is, of course, if you make it more difficult to access a system, it also means it's harder for the clinician or the patient who wants access to that data to get their hands on it as well. So it's a real challenge going forward. I have seen increased investment in cybersecurity by many healthcare and aged care organizations. I was at the conference just last week, Aging Australia, and a lot of the IT people highlighted the fact that they're spending a lot more money on cybersecurity and having to justify that in their budgets. We do have a national cybersecurity group here. It's actually run by a military general. It's quite an amazing organization. I think we need to start thinking about cybersecurity from a broader perspective and making healthcare play a much more active role within those organizations. But it comes down to competing priorities. There's so many priorities in healthcare delivery. Cybersecurity is yet one more. However, without that working, the rest of your digital transformation journey can't go ahead. So you need to really balance it all. And the almighty dollar still becomes the limiting factor, unfortunately.
Yeah, it does. And we've seen in Australia as well, Qantas got hacked. And, every second Australian probably has an account with Qantas and got the emails. It was only on the news headlines for a day, I think, maybe two at most. They really managed that crisis, the PR side of it, very well. But it was really interesting looking at that case with what happened with Qantas, because that was social engineering. There wasn't some bot infecting ransomware that the Russians sent over. It was actually individuals in a planned way calling and speaking to a real human and pretending they were someone else. This social engineering aspect of cybersecurity, that is also now an issue. And we do know humans, we are companies' biggest defense, but we're also its biggest weakness. We're too trusting and we go, oh, sure, no worries. Let me fix that problem for you.
It's a huge challenge. We need to get our heads around it. Organizations need to take it seriously. If you look at the Australian Institute of Company Directors, they've got it as one of the chief priorities for boards to at least understand what their cybersecurity risks are and how they can respond to it.
All right. Well, good luck to those two pathology providers. I'm glad you fixed up your networks, and let's hope we don't see any more headlines about those types of stories for quite some time. Now, George, on our final topic, I wanted to give a shout out to a couple of really positive AI use cases in cancer detection and treatment. So firstly, in the United States, the FDA has approved an AI platform that predicts a woman's 5-year breast cancer risk directly from routine mammograms. Currently, a tumour has to be visible to the human eye to enable treatment combined with family history and your demographics to determine your risk. But this AI, which has been trained on millions of mammograms actually predicts your breast cancer risk within the next 5 years, which is very cool. And I know I talked about it before on the podcast and I like to overshare. I have now had a mammogram, so I can say I've experienced that and was very pleased that my results showed that nothing to worry about. I tell you what, there was no AI in saying, hey, where should I be in 5 years? Is there anything to worry about? And then in another positive AI cancer story, and this one more local to home, it was reported in Pulse IT that researchers from the University of Melbourne and Western Health in Victoria have developed a new artificial intelligence tool that prevents cancer patients from receiving incorrect doses of chemotherapy. This is a good news story, obviously, for patients undergoing chemotherapy, but it's also a good news for clinicians who treat them, and it's a commercialization story, as the research has spun out into a company called PredictX Health, and the team recently secured a grant of just under $500,000 to help them on their way. And George, I was thinking at the end of last year, wearing my Medical Angels and Seeker lab hat, we hosted a pitch evening. And Professor Justin Jung, who is the colorectal surgeon behind this, he gave an impressive pitch at that event. And I learnt from him that apparently it's really difficult to get the chemotherapy dose right for an individual. How it's calculated is based on a patient's body surface area, basically your height and weight, which is pretty inaccurate. And Justin uses the example is you could have a patient who is a sumo wrestler and someone who is a bodybuilder, and they have similar body surface areas and they would be given the same chemo dose. But of course, their body composition in terms of muscle and fat composition is vastly different. So anyway, good on them for this, and good to have some positive cancer AI stories, I think, to round out the pod today.
Absolutely. I mean, as we talked earlier about when you visit the WEHI, I mean, this sort of research is amazing. And cancer is by far the most complex disease state there is. There's no surprise that AI is playing a significant role in it. But if you remember back to the launch of IBM Watson back in about 10, 12 years ago, oncology was its original use case. It did interesting stuff, but didn't quite get to where it needed to get to. And I've read recently they've sold off that organization and it's coming back again as a new organization. So I'll keep an eye on that. It is a really complex area. AI gives us an opportunity to analyze the huge amounts of data that we're collecting in this space. And if you look at the data we now collect around oncology, years ago, we had the three measures: the size, the location, the number of nodes. Now we know the biomarkers of the proteins on the individual cells. There's so much more data there that we can analyze. AI is a great tool for doing that. Again, it just highlights the need for research. The example was a clinical group and a research group working together to develop a solution. And as we referred to earlier, it's an opportunity for Australia to play a world-leading role here. Not that we aren't already, but time to maybe press the accelerator on that one.
Yeah, that's right. And we did invent the HP vaccine as well, which, is all over the world now.
Absolutely. I mean, look, there's lots of innovation coming out of Australia. And one thing we don't do a great job here is promoting the people in Australia who do that innovation. And often we'll find they'll head off overseas because of that. There's an opportunity for us to leverage the resources we have here. And I touched on it earlier. I think if my superannuation fund was being invested into health research, which would give me both a financial return and a health benefit return when I actually do retire and want to use the services, I think we need to start thinking about some of those things differently in this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations to everyone involved, and we look forward to being able to follow up and see what more work is coming out of Australia in this space. Well, George, it is time for a quick break, and when we return, we will be joined by Australia's Chief Allied Health Officer, Anita Hobson-Powell.
Fantastic, Louise.
Regular listeners to Pulse would know that I've been an advocate for uplifting digital capability across the entire allied health sector for pretty much all of my career. So today, it gives me great pleasure to introduce Pulse Poddies to Anita Hobson-Powell, the inaugural Chief Allied Health Officer at the Australian Government Department of Health, Disability and Ageing. An exercise physiologist by training, Anita has spent her career in executive leadership roles in associations advocating for professional recognition and access to allied health professions, including an impressive 17-plus year stint as CEO of Exercise and Sports Science Australia. In her role as the Chief Allied Health Officer for Australia, Anita champions a unified vision for integrating Australia's 300,000-plus allied health professionals into our national digital health ecosystem, which is what we're going to explore in our chat today. Anita, welcome to the Pulse Pod studio.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining us.
Now, Anita, what inspired your appointment as Chief Allied Health Officer? Like, how does this role fit within the department's broader digital health strategy?
Yeah, so I guess what brought me to this role was, as you mentioned, I was at one of the allied health associations for a number of years. As part of that, I really got involved with Allied Health Professions Australia, and I formed the National Alliance of Self-Regulating Health Professions. And I had a really strong interest in wider allied health policy. I knew as individual professions, we would really struggle on our own and we needed to have that collective voice. So I loved doing that, had the opportunity to meet with stakeholders and with the department many occasions. And so when the job came up, I was encouraged to apply. I do sit in the area of primary care, but I'm a resource for the whole of the department. So no matter what section needs me, they can reach out. So mental health, aged care, disability, and as you mentioned, work with the digital health branch and also with the Digital Health Agency. And I sit on their steering committee that's looking at the allied health uplift into the digital health space.
Excellent. So allied health is a very broad church, over 30 diverse professions. How do you as Chief Allied Health Officer ensure that perspectives of all those professions are brought into play?
Yeah, it's not an easy job. Depending on what definition of allied health, we could have from 30 up to about 58 different allied health professions. So if you look at the state and territory EBA agreements, pretty much if you're not a doctor, a nurse or a dentist, you get lumped into allied health. As you mentioned, they're all very distinct. They have different service models of delivery. They have different maturities as a profession, let alone their different maturities in digital health space. They've got different ways of working. Some are highly mobile, so they'll be out on the road. Some are fixed in one location. Some will be in multiple fixed locations. Some are very techno-savvy. Some are still paper-based. And so trying to be across them as much as possible, I really had to understand the main players in this space. And so I really prioritise my engagement with the sector to try and make sure that I'm understanding, doing some really active listening to what's going on, trying to engage as much as possible with frontline practitioners, asking them lots of questions that will help me understand from their grassroots understanding their application of government policy, what will help them, what is hindering them, are there risks and opportunities. So it's really about having those conversations. And then leading into the digital health work is I'm on this steering committee with the Digital Health Agency, and I'm trying to bring in those conversations that I'm having with everyone. I guess a lot of this work in the past was done in the medical model where the GP is sitting in one practice a lot of the time in this bricks and mortar, whereas allied health often are not like that. As I mentioned, some are 100% on the road. So we need a system that will allow for that mobility, or they'll do some days on the road and some days in a fixed building. Some are working between aged care, disability and health. So it's trying to really bring some practical elements to the conversations. I'll leave the technical stuff to those who know it best.
One of the great things about digital health, gone are the days where you have to have a level of technical understanding to participate in the discussions, because the technical stuff is actually pretty easy these days. There'll be some of our listeners who'll be like, hey, my job is hard, not easy. But yeah, that's wonderful for the diversity in the field of digital health to be able to have you in the room to represent what is a huge amount of individual professions and the diversity within, let alone across 30 to 50 odd different professions. So you've got your work cut out for you there, I'm sure. So what do you hear are the biggest obstacles that hinder allied health's uptake of digital tools? And what do you see is being done to address those concerns?
Is really around their workplace readiness. So, still surprising how many people are still paper-based. How do we get them to really say that we need to take that next step and get you onto a computer? I think also the complexity around the systems. Some businesses these days are becoming really multidisciplinary. And so what software used to be good for just one profession, how do they make it viable for multiple allied health professions? What's it going to cost? Are they going to have multiple different softwares because they've got 5 different professions in-house, or some up to 10 these days, and they weren't integrated. Allied health has been a bit slow to the market. And from a government perspective, understandably, their focus was around the GPs and trying to get them ready and using the system. So a lot of the education and tools to support the uplift hasn't been there. So that's what they're looking for. They're looking for support and guidance, looking to make sure that they don't have to have multiple softwares because of the different professions. A lot of them also are wanting to know that it's going to be a good investment. So what are they going to get out of this? Is it going to mean that they're going to get better health outcomes? Is it going to be a requirement to access funding or services? Is there going to be support for them to implement it? So a lot of them are just sitting back waiting to see what's going to be there to help them come aboard as well.
What you said, which is a great thing too. It's more about organisational maturity. There's not an issue with individual clinicians going, oh, no, thanks. I want to keep my paper record and write all my reports in the middle of the night when I should be watching television or hanging out with my partner. So it is really that organisational aspect. Most of the allied health professionals I know, they're all still on paper. They don't want to be, but unless you make the time yourself to go and investigate what options are available to you, it's not part of their day-to-day. It's not a concern amongst individual clinicians not wanting to do this. It really is that the structure, the systems are not in place to enable it to be easy for them.
There's so much reform and change going on just in general. And so this is just another thing that's ending up on their desk that they need to put energy and time into. And so gets put in the too hard basket. It's like, well, these are the immediate things that is going to impact my funding and my client care. So let's do that. And we'll wait and see what happens to this down the track. I was talking to a business owner the other day about AI, and I was asking the question, are you using AI to help with your business? And it was interesting around their comment was, oh, yes, we will, but it comes at an expense. I've got to buy so many licenses, and what's going to be the return, because we still have to do our notes separately. And so, they're still not really sure, even just to pilot something, give something a go with 1 or 2 people and see if there's that return on investment. They just see it as, I've got to fork out more money, and what am I getting advantage from it?
You note that return on investment. So my original background, I originally trained as an optometrist before I went back and did medicine. So optometry was probably one of the more computerized allied health industries, but it had very specific solutions for its very specific needs. Even as part of the education in the School of Optometry back in the 70s and 80s, computers were there because we were part of the School of Physics, not the School of Healthcare. But now, going forward, one of the big challenges, and I'm keen to get your feedback on this, the professional bodies, the universities, employers, how can they incentivize digital adoption in day-to-day practice and make it so that allied health integrates across the whole spectrum of healthcare delivery?
Yeah, look, I'm not really sure how incentivization is actually going to occur. And I guess we'll see as this gets rolled out if there are more tangible incentives that happen. But going back to the first point is the professional associations or the APRA boards need to make sure that digital health competencies are embedded in their professional standards, because that's really guides what the university is going to be teaching. And sometimes some of those boards and accreditation councils, they will wait until they're due for review, which could be 5-6 years down the track. And then by the time that universities update them, it's 10 years down the track. Well, digital stuff, we would have moved on. So we need to have this ongoing, up-to-date versions of these professional standards to make sure that we are adapting as we come through. So the professional standards are one. The second part is it would be great to see when they went out onto their clinical placements. So all of allied health have to go out and do hours out in the community, is there should be a mandatory tick box that they have engaged in some kind of digital health element when they're out there. So often the universities will have criteria if we want them exposed to X, Y, and Z. I think this is a compulsory one that they do. And at every location they go to, because they'll get exposed to different types of tools and software. I think then for businesses, they really need to put budget aside to invest into this space and pilot some of these tools, making sure that they're sending their staff or they're going along to any education that is being delivered in this space. And then it's also then up to professional associations to be running training or to be partnering with groups which can bring them along on that journey. So I think it's going to be multifactorial around how we actually get people to adopt these tools, because the stickers there around, well, unless you use this, you won't access funding. And that could be the path that we eventually go down, is that some of the stuff that the government is working on, it will be linked to funding. And I don't want people to wait until we get there to be able to get their systems up and running.
Yeah, no, that's right. And I understand that just recently, AHPRA updated their guidance on developing professional capabilities, and it did include digital health stuff in there. So that is good. But it's not the professional capabilities themselves, but the guidance for developing them. So that's something, at least, in step in the right direction.
It is. Just on that, so only 13 of the allied health professions fall under AHPRA. So we need those professional associations who are not part of AHPRA to do exactly that as well, to make sure that there is the capabilities for those professionals.
Yes, thank you. Important point. So the Allied Health Digital Transformation Survey report, which was done by the Australian Digital Health Agency and the wonderful people at Allied Health Professions Australia, they had a really great response. They had just over 2,500 responses, I believe, and the survey revealed really strong awareness but variable digital confidence across 36 different professions. Which report findings have most shaped your priorities when you're sitting in these important meetings wearing your allied health hat and on behalf of, 36 plus professions? What findings have really shaped your priorities when it comes to digital?
I think the one that really first jumped out at me was 36% did not use a clinical information system in their practice. So it means either it's paper-based or they're putting their documents on some kind of Word or something. But I was quite alarmed that it was that high. I thought in this day and age, we would have had a lot less. I thought there'd be still some old school people, but that really jumped out at me that we've got a long way to go if a third of the professions and not in using a system. And I think then also the other stat was how many did not know whether they had registered with the My Health record. Understand that, we often sign up to things and forget what we're doing, but it's an important thing that it should at least trigger yourself into action to actually go, right, do I need to go and check? Because that's going to really be the fundamental place where they're going to need to interact. The final stat that came through for me was still this misconception around the security and privacy arrangements with anything that gets uploaded into a clinical management system. So we have to do a bit to bring more awareness around digital health, limitations, optimizations, which really leads to the draft digital uplift plan for allied health, a 5-year plan around what we're trying to do for allied health to get them on the journey. So it will be out for consultation with the sector to see if we've missed anything. Have we understood all your needs? Are there gaps? Are there things you're excited about? So this is a good place for the whole of the sector to have a look at this plan and really give some feedback officially through the consultation hub or through your professional bodies sending information who then can talk to me to take to those conversations as well.
Oh, I'm so excited to hear that.
So, Anita, I'm a self-declared nerd. So back in 1983, when I graduated from optometry, one of the first things I did was go and buy a Commodore 64 computer and develop some software for use in optometry clinics to capture demographics and recalls and even prescriptions. I spent hours and weeks and months developing this thing, which was only for my own use. Back in that day, no allied health professional had any clinical system. We did everything manually. So since then, we've had significant improvements. But we're still a long way behind most of the other professions. The Digital Health Agency a few months ago launched an allied health industry offer to accelerate the connection of the allied health professions into My Health record. Because, again, whilst a lot of professions had systems, they were very siloed systems. Are you seeing more allied health professionals able to contribute to My Health record? And what do we need to do to make that happen so that the allied health data is also considered to be part of our ongoing personal health record?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, there were 16 of these vendors who received some funding to have uplift to their software. Of that 16, we had some players who are core in the allied health space, and then there was a couple of new players to the market. The project's only really got started and they've just submitted their plans to the Digital Health Agency. The whole plan is how they can update their systems on the back end to make sure that the allied health professionals can contribute to the My Health record. There's so many different allied health professional softwares out there. We want to make sure that they all come along on the journey. So it's going to rely on market driven. So if you're an allied health professional and your software has not been selected or they didn't put in an application for funding, you need to push back, because it's similar with the health funds. If the members want something, then the health funds responds. I'm hoping that we'll see the same here, is that the practitioners themselves will be able to say back to the softwares, we really need this. We'll get better outcomes for our patients if we can upload straight into the My Health record.
Now, over to talk about workforce strategy. So congratulations on the National Allied Health Workforce Strategy, which has been widely consulted across Australia. The draft has 5 priorities for allied health workforce. Can you tell us what they are and how digital and data underpins these priorities?
Yeah, absolutely. So yes, we have 5 priority areas in the draft. The first one is around enhancing the impact of allied health professionals. The second one is improving national allied health workforce data and planning. The third is to build sustainable allied health workforce. The fourth one is about growing and supporting the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander workforce. And the final one is around the rural and remote workforce. In all areas, there is this underpinning of digital health. Primarily, though, it does sit in priority 1, where we'll be using digital health to really support multidisciplinary teams, collaboration and communication. It's also about new models of care and also how we can modernise referral pathways, making sure that there's a good patient journey. Really, at the end of the day, is making sure that information follows that patient to make sure the clinician can make the right decision, instead of relying on the doctor to communicate everything in their letters or faxes, or the patient coming along and remembering all their medications they're on, for example. But hopefully we'll get more data around service delivery to help with workforce planning. So obviously we need to collect data on how many allied health professionals are out there, what they're doing. But if we know what services they're delivering, what the demand is, we can help with that workforce planning as well. All of this really underpins how do we make sure that allied health professionals are a valuable provider in our healthcare system? And they want that, they need that, but data drives this. And so if we can have these systems that allow the GP to see that they're having great outcomes with their patient in real time, then we'll see more referrals coming through, or they'll realise, okay, well, I can change their medications, or maybe they don't need that surgery now. So it really brings back to that real value of allied health, and the data and the information that can be transferred because of digital health will allow us to get there.
Yeah. Oh, and I mean, we should be there already, but hopefully it's not too far away. Where I go visit my GP, they've got a dashboard about Louise, and it shows them that I've met with the dietitian and I'm following the plan that the dietitian has put me on, or whoever else in allied health. It'll be great to get there where we have the dashboards and everyone is contributing. You don't have to flick through, like you said, looking for a referral letter that'll have like 2 sentences in it or something like that. That's not as helpful as it really should be when you're looking at actual data sharing.
Yeah, just for conversation starters, I know they've seen the dietitian this week. It'll be like, oh, so what was the outcome? Are you doing anything different? Like it prompts those conversations rather than relying on the patient to say, oh, actually, I saw the dietitian this week and this is what was said. It really helps with that holistic care of the patient.
The concept of multidisciplinary teams has been a buzzword in healthcare for many years, but the reality has been that it's been difficult to do because each of them has their own information silos.
Well, finally, what is your message, Anita, to allied health professionals about stepping up as digital champions, both within their own practice and in broader system design?
Yeah, so I think firstly, if it's not you in your business, find someone who can be that champion. I think every business needs to have someone who has got that dedicated champion, and both getting them to go along to educational systems, bringing that information out, piloting some work. As I mentioned, the Allied Health Uplift Plan is out for consultation. This is really critical that people are responding to that strategy either directly through the consultation or through their professional association, so that you can guide what we are doing and helping the delivery of what is appropriate for the allied health sector. I went to a presentation, it was an internal government the other day, and they were saying AI is coming. If you don't get on board, you're going to be left behind. And I think that's what digital health is going to be for our sector. You are going to be left behind. Either you're going to miss out on opportunities, or really at the end of the day, your patients are going to be missing out on getting the best care. And so people walk the talk. And if they're not happy with your services, they're going to find someone else. So, if they're talking to their friend at coffee and they've got access to this and they're not getting it, they're going to be questioning you and moving on to other services as well. So I think embrace it, sign up to as much information as possible, and make sure you've got that champion in your workplace.
One of the things you run, Louise, is the Seeker Labs. Is there much engagement by allied health? Where are we as far as driving them to become clinician innovators, as you'd love to call them?
Yeah, well, and I'd love to hear your take on that, Anita. I think the challenge that I see with allied health professionals engaging in that entrepreneurial space is to learn how to do something different. It's a professional development exercise, isn't it? And the people that I teach how to be clinician entrepreneurs, there's more doctors than anyone else, more hospital people than others, and that's because they have funds as part of their employment agreement to be able to use at their discretion for professional development. If you work for yourself, as many allied health professions do, they just don't have that discretionary ability. So I think that's a challenge for them. I'll certainly make that as one of my notes when the consultation comes out, Anita, the professional development requirements so allied health people can upskill. What are your thoughts?
I think you made the excellent point around most allied health professionals, so about 80% are out in private practice community space. Someone gave me the stat the other day of 100,000 of the 300,000 allied health professionals are in a business of 3 people or less. So you think about, if you're a sole practitioner, like you're saying, that investment in their business or their PD, they're struggling just to be a business owner, or if they've just got a small team, again, it's an expensive exercise. So that's one thing that I'm really conscious of. We're needing to make sure that these people, where a majority are supported, because otherwise they're going to be left behind and not engaged.
That's a really good point.
Yep. Well, that's right. But great to have you on the show, Anita. Thank you so much for your time and congratulations on the role. I know it's not new for you anymore, but it's the first time we've had a chance to talk with you. So really excited for your appointment, and it's such an important role. And thank you, because I know digital health is only one component of your portfolio, looking after those massive amount of diversity in the allied health professions, but really appreciate all of the work that you and your team are doing to uplift allied health's involvement in the digital health agenda.
No worries. Thanks for the invitation, and hopefully maybe in 12, 18 months' time we can connect again and we can report on some of the excellent work that's been done and the uplift we're seeing.
Absolutely. We're looking forward to the success stories in the future of allied health as a key player in multidisciplinary care and digital as a tool to enable that.
Well, thanks for having me, Louise and George.
Thanks.
Thank you. George, it was so great to have Anita on the show. And I also wanted to give a shout out and we just touched on it in our interview with her, but the Digital Health Agency, the Department of Health, Disability and Ageing, and Allied Health Professions Australia, they've launched their consultation on the National Allied Health Digital Uplift. Now, responses are due the 20th of July. So I just wanted to give a shout out. We'll put a link in the show notes. Please, if you are an allied health professional, if you work alongside allied health professionals, if you have just opinions on this stuff, check out the link and put in your responses. So it's great to see the government looking to invest in how do we upskill and support our allied health professions.
Absolutely. And both of us started our careers as allied health workers. And again, it's an important part of the system. And whilst I did go back and do medicine, so I may have a preponderance to talk about doctors, we are such a small part of such a large multidisciplinary system, and we need to take that into account.
Yeah, it's great to have. And even the fact that Australia has a Chief Allied Health Officer. And I know it's not a full-time appointment, it's a part-time appointment, but still, we have one. That's still relatively new, which is great to see that we have someone in that role now.
Sure. I guess we could debate for years whether the terminology is correct. Are they allied health or are they just health workers?
Yes.
We don't have long enough to go through that discussion tonight.
That's right. Well, I'm speaking at the National Allied Health Conference next month, so maybe I'll see if I can stir the pot a little there about the nomenclature, or not want to wade into that. George, did you have any recommendations for the Pulse Potties this week?
Keep your eye on humanoid robots and see where they come into. I'm heading off overseas on a holiday later this year, and whilst I'm in Athens, in Greece, they will be having the first humanoid robot Olympics being held in Olympia, the original grounds of the Olympic Games. So I'm hoping to be able to get over there to at least get a photo shoot with a running humanoid robot. I was always a bit of a naysayer around robotics, and I'm still not convinced it's necessarily the solution, but just watching the advancements is interesting. So look out for photos of George running 100 meters against a humanoid robot on the sacred grounds of Olympia in the next month or so.
Oh my God. All right. We are definitely going to be talking about that after that experience. I love it. Well, I just had a couple of other things that I just wanted to give a shout out to, noting that our friends at the Digital Health Agency have released the Health Connect Australia strategy, architecture and roadmap to enable health information exchange. We will get Peter back on the show in a future episode to give us an update on how their work is progressing. But if you want to check in on that, we'll put a link in the show notes to those really important documents. And congratulations to everyone behind the scenes who puts these things together. And, we've talked before on the pod, George, that Australia has achieved recognition internationally that our national strategies tend to actually also have implementation plans and delivery plans. They're not just ambitions. And, we want to give a shout out to the importance of that.
Absolutely, yeah. And it's interesting because, Health Connect was the terminology used back in the early 2000s for the initial project. So we are consistent, which is great. And like I said, Peter, when we had him on the show a couple of months ago, highlighted the work in progress. And I think it's great that we're seeing it coming to fruition.
Yes, absolutely. And another shout out, sorry, all of our friends have been so busy, so I wanted to give them shout outs. So there is a Future of Digital Health in Australia study happening through the Australian Catholic University. Now, I'll put a link to the show notes. What the researchers are doing is they are currently asking for expressions of interest for you to participate in this research. And the idea is that the outcome will be a document and a plan to actually look at a vision for the future of Australia's digital health environment. They say that Australia needs an agreed future national vision to harness health data for better care, which we would agree with here on the pod. So they want to seek some sort of consensus on the key principles to guide such a strategy. The work is being led by Dr. Evelyn Havenga, who is, I think, the second person in Australia to receive AM for her work in digital health. And the study originally was done in Catalan by our friend Dr. Jordi Jimenez, who's the Director of Digital Health Strategy Office there over in Catalan. So they're actually replicating his work here in Australia. So if you want to get involved, fill out the expression of interest, whether you've got a government and policy background, a healthcare delivery background, education, research, your technology, and also consumer as well, and professionals in any regards. So please check that out, fill out the expression of interest, and have the opportunity to have your say in shaping this future vision for Australia's digital health environment.
Very exciting.
All right, George. Well, I think I've finished with all my shout outs today. So would you please wrap up the episode for us?
Sure. Thank you all for listening to Pulse, brought to you by Pulse IT News. Pulse is produced by Ivan Jurek of Octopod Productions. Big thanks to everyone for listening. Make sure you subscribe, follow and rate us wherever you get your podcasts. And don't forget, you can visit pulseit.news to sign up for the e-newsletter and explore Pulse IT's massive digital archive. Send any feedback or topic suggestions to pulsepod@pulseit.news. We'd love to hear what's on your mind. Welcome and thanks, everyone.
Thanks, George. I know you're battling with a little bit of a cold, so it was great to have you. I know your voice is even deeper. It's cool.